On the evening of June 5, 1990, a cook arrived for work at Tegel Crown, a restaurant in central Copenhagen. Before beginning her shift, she unlocked the basement beneath the building, which staff used as a changing room and storage area. In the dim light, she immediately noticed someone lying on the floor. As she moved closer, she realized it was a young woman. Her hands had been bound with a black electrical cord that was also wrapped around her neck. 2 dishcloths had been forced deep into her mouth, and there were injuries to her neck and arms. A strange symbol had been carved into one of her forearms, and her body had been covered in floor wax. Beneath her lay an unopened packet of prophylactics, while the rest of the scene appeared to have been carefully wiped clean of fingerprints and other obvious forensic traces. Investigators later concluded that the cloths had blocked her airway, causing her to suffocate, while the cuts and the wax appeared to have been applied after her passing. The victim was quickly identified as Stina Geisler. She lived with her parents in the very same building, only a few floors above the basement where she was discovered. Earlier that morning, her parents had noticed something that immediately concerned them. Stina Geisler's bicycle was still locked in the courtyard, but she wasn't in her room. Knowing their daughter always told them where she was going and rarely disappeared without explanation, they began calling relatives and friends. Nobody had seen her since the previous night. Before they had a chance to report her missing, police arrived with devastating news. Stina was just 18 years old and only days away from graduating from high school. She had recently achieved top marks in one of her final examinations and had only a handful of tests remaining before beginning the next chapter of her life. Friends described her as intelligent, thoughtful, and always willing to help others. Alongside school, she worked part-time at Café Vilde, and she was a familiar face at Sabina's cafeteria, where Copenhagen's writers, journalists, and artists often gathered. She was known for moving comfortably between her studies, her family life, and the city's creative nightlife. The previous evening had been one of celebration. After attending a friend's birthday party, Stina and several friends headed into the city centre to enjoy Copenhagen's annual Whitsun Carnival. The streets were crowded with music, costumes, and thousands of people celebrating into the early hours. Around 2:30 that morning, she said goodbye to her friends near Gamel Strand and cycled home alone. Friends later recalled that she deliberately avoided drinking too much because she had family plans the next day and still wanted to study for her remaining exams. It was the last time anyone who knew her saw her alive. Investigators believe Stina successfully made it home. Her bicycle was exactly where it should have been inside the shared courtyard, behind the building on Norra Volgade. Sometime after arriving, however, she encountered an unknown person. Detectives concluded she was forced into the basement beneath Tegel Crown, where she ultimately lost her life. Police later described the offender as someone who appeared to take satisfaction in humiliating the victim. Yet one detail continued to puzzle investigators more than any other. The strange symbol carved into Stina's forearm was never fully revealed to the public. Police deliberately withheld its exact appearance, believing it could serve as valuable information if the person responsible was ever questioned. The investigation rapidly became one of the largest homicide inquiries Denmark had ever seen. 35 detectives were assigned to the case, and approximately 4,000 people were interviewed over the following months and years. Detectives initially focused on the men in Stina Geisler's life. Her carefully written diary listed numerous friends and acquaintances, including a brief relationship with a married journalist nearly twice her age. He admitted the relationship during questioning, but provided a confirmed alibi and was quickly eliminated from the investigation. Attention then shifted to another unidentified man. Several witnesses recalled seeing Stina speaking with a younger man who had short hair, facial stubble, and distinctive leather trousers. A night watchman later reported seeing a man matching that description, standing outside her building at approximately 2:55 that morning, almost exactly when investigators believed she arrived home. Police eventually identified the man, but he too produced a solid alibi, leaving detectives back where they had started. Another man who attracted considerable police attention was Peter Kronholm, better known by the nickname Mr. Smiley. He lived nearby, had a history of serious violence, and could not account for his movements after 1 o'clock that morning. Despite repeated interviews, investigators found no forensic evidence linking him to the basement and no clear motive. Years later, Kronholm would be convicted in an unrelated murder case, but authorities never connected him to the death of Stina. Other notorious offenders, including the Amer man, were also considered during later reviews of the case, but once again there was no evidence placing them at the scene. As months became years, the investigation turned into one of Denmark's most closely followed criminal cases. Television appeals featured recordings from Stina's parents, asking the public for information, while newspapers devoted enormous coverage to every possible lead. Some publications even recreated the crime scene using manipulated photographs, prompting criticism that parts of the media had crossed ethical boundaries in pursuit of readers. Despite thousands of interviews and relentless publicity, no breakthrough ever came. More than 3 decades later, the murder of Stina remains one of Denmark's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Recent advances in forensic science have provided investigators with renewed hope. Modern DNA techniques have allowed specialists to recover genetic profiles from evidence that could not be examined when the investigation first began in 1990. Police have confirmed that previously unobtainable DNA profiles now exist, although they still do not know whose they are. Investigators have described it as a race against time, acknowledging that whoever left those traces could now be elderly or may no longer be alive. Until those DNA profiles are matched to a name, the case known across Denmark as the Carnival murder remains without an answer. On the morning of November 1st, 2014, police officers arrived at an expensive high-rise apartment in Hong Kong's Wan Chai district after receiving several calls from the man inside. When officers entered the luxury flat on the 31st floor of J residence, they found a scene unlike anything they had encountered before. One woman, later identified as 29-year-old Seneng Mujiasi, also known as Jessie Lorena Rurik, was lying on the floor with severe injuries. She was still alive when police entered, but passed away shortly afterwards, despite emergency treatment. Around 8 hours later, officers made another horrifying discovery. Hidden inside a large suitcase on the apartment's balcony was the body of a second woman, 23-year-old Sumati Ningsi, who investigators believed had been killed several days earlier. Although the case became known around the world because of the man responsible, the 2 victims had traveled to Hong Kong for the same reason as thousands of others, to improve the lives of their families. Sumati Ningsi was born in Cilacap, Indonesia. After leaving school, she married and had a young son. She first traveled to Hong Kong in 2011, working as a domestic helper for nearly 3 years before returning home. Hoping to build a better future, she completed a disc jockey training course in Yogyakarta before traveling back to Hong Kong in August 2014 on a tourist visa, intending to find work in the city's nightlife industry. She had told her family she planned to return to Indonesia on November 2nd, just 1 day after police would discover her body. Seneng Mujiasi came from southeast Sulawesi and had first traveled to Hong Kong in 2006 to work as a domestic helper. By 2014, her work permit had expired, and she was earning money in entertainment venues around Wan Chai. Friends described her as outgoing and optimistic. On Halloween night, she was seen outside a local pub, speaking briefly with an acquaintance, before smiling and saying she was going to have fun at a Halloween party. Those were the last known words anyone heard from her. Wan Chai itself was a district of sharp contrasts. Luxury apartment towers overlooked neon-lit bars, pubs and clubs where expatriates, tourists and migrant workers mixed late into the night. While escorting was legal under certain circumstances in Hong Kong, many women worked independently, often supplementing low wages or trying to support families back home. Many had traveled thousands of miles simply because the opportunities available in Indonesia or the Philippines could not provide enough to support parents or children. The man who rented the apartment had lived a very different life. Rurik Jutting had been born in London in 1985 and educated at Winchester College before studying history and law at Peterhouse, Cambridge. After graduating, he worked for Barclays before joining Bank of America Merrill Lynch. eventually relocating to Hong Kong in 2013. By his late 20s, he held a prestigious position in finance and reportedly earned hundreds of thousands of pounds each year. On paper, his career appeared exceptionally successful. Behind that outward success, however, his life had begun to deteriorate. He had become increasingly dependent on alcohol and substances, while also withdrawing from colleagues and spending long periods isolated inside his apartment. He resigned from his job only days before the police arrived at his door. An automated out-of-office email he created described himself as an insane psychopath and suggested anyone needing urgent assistance should contact God. Investigators examining the apartment found thousands of photographs and videos stored on his phone, alongside evidence documenting the final days of both victims. The recordings became a major part of the prosecution's case and demonstrated that many of his actions had been deliberately documented by Jutting himself. Prosecutors argued that this evidence showed planning, awareness, and control over what he was doing. The defense did not dispute that Jutting was responsible for the terrible events. Instead, his lawyers argued that several diagnosed mental disorders, combined with severe substance and alcohol dependency, substantially reduced his responsibility. 4 psychiatrists diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder, while additional evidence described addiction, alcohol dependence, and sadism. The prosecution accepted that these conditions existed, but argued they did not prevent him from understanding his actions or making decisions. The jury ultimately agreed with the prosecution. After a trial lasting several weeks, jurors rejected the defense argument that the offenses amounted to manslaughter through diminished responsibility. In November 2016, Jutting was convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. As he stood in court, a statement written by him was read aloud expressing remorse and apologizing to both families, particularly mentioning Sumatai's young son. The trial judge, however, concluded that Jutting represented an immense danger to the public and ordered that he spend the rest of his life in prison. His later appeals were unsuccessful. For many observers in Indonesia, the case also highlighted another issue. Despite international headlines focusing heavily on the banker at the center of the investigation, campaigners argued that far less attention was paid to the lives of the 2 women themselves. Their families described them not by the work they had done, but by the sacrifices they had made to support parents, children, and relatives back home. In the years that followed, many believed that remembering Sumati Ningsi and Seneng Mujiasi as people rather than simply victims remained just as important as remembering the crimes that took their lives.
Foreigner customers, they like to talk to you, sit at our table, they will buy drinks for you. And then after that, if they ask if you're available or if you can come with me, go outside, it's up to you if you're gonna agree. We don't know that we have a friend can kill people. Rurik sometimes have a good mood and then sometimes have a bad mood. He ordered many white wine. He asked about a party, jacuzzi party. And then he said, I'm gonna pay all the girls here, 8 girls, and they pay us to stay with him in a hotel. We're just joking about if Rurik is a killer and we are the victims. And that time, we don't know that he's real, that he's a killer, but we are not the victims. Sometimes he's laughing, sometimes he's serious. For example, he's sitting on the couch. He's serious, and then a while ago, he's laughing. Everything here in this world, he can buy because he's rich. And I don't know why he needs to kill.
On the afternoon of March 7, 2018, 14-year-old Kira Gross was at home in the Berlin district of Alt-Heuschenhausen. Before her mother finished work, Kira phoned to say she was home safely and asked to be called when it was time to come back. It was an ordinary conversation, the kind that thousands of parents have with their children every day. Neither mother nor daughter had any idea it would be their last. When Karen Gross finished work, she tried calling her daughter several times. There was no answer. A WhatsApp message also failed to deliver, leading her to believe there might simply be a network problem or that Kira had fallen asleep. It was only when she arrived home that everything changed. The living room door was closed, something she immediately found unusual. After checking Kira's bedroom and finding it empty, she opened the living room door and discovered her daughter critically injured. Kira had suffered more than 20 sharp impacts, and emergency responders fought for around 90 minutes to save her life. But despite every effort, she passed away in front of her mother. Kira had been a well-liked student, an only child raised by her single mother, and a talented speed skater. Just weeks earlier, she had become Berlin champion in her age group, over the 1,500-meter distance. Friends described her as cheerful, outgoing, and full of plans. Her calendar contained upcoming events, training sessions, and activities stretching months into the future, something investigators would later consider highly significant. As homicide detectives began their investigation, almost no information about a suspect had been released publicly. That is standard practice in many serious criminal investigations, particularly when officers are still gathering evidence. But before police had identified anyone responsible, an entirely different investigation had already begun online. Within hours of the first police announcement, social media posts using hashtags connected to Kira's ending began appearing across Twitter and Facebook. Numerous accounts claimed they already knew who had carried out the attack, despite having no evidence whatsoever. The speculation centered almost entirely on one assumption. Because the attack involved a sharp instrument, many users insisted the perpetrator must be a refugee or migrant. Some even claimed that no German would ever commit such a crime. The rumors quickly spread through far-right online communities that were already focused on immigration, following Germany's acceptance of hundreds of thousands of refugees in 2015. Kira's demise was repeatedly linked to two earlier murders that had genuinely been committed by asylum seekers, despite investigators having released absolutely no information connecting this case to immigration. The lack of official details allowed speculation to fill the vacuum. 4 days after the event, police arrested a 15-year-old suspect. Even then, officers declined to release his ethnic or religious background, following long-standing German press guidelines designed to avoid encouraging discriminatory reporting during ongoing investigations. Rather than calming the rumors, the decision intensified them. Politicians, activists, and prominent online personalities accused authorities of deliberately hiding the truth. Some publicly questioned why the suspect's origin had not been disclosed, suggesting there was a cover-up designed to protect migrants. These accusations gained enormous traction, despite there being no evidence to support them. One of the most influential figures to amplify the false narrative was Pegida founder Lutz Bachmann. He claimed he had identified the suspect, describing him online as a Chechen Muslim and a former refugee from the Caucasus. He then published the name, photographs, and Facebook profile of a teenage boy. There was just one problem. The boy Bachmann identified had absolutely nothing to do with the murder. He simply happened to share the same first name and surname initial as the real suspect. Almost overnight, an innocent teenager became the target of widespread attacks after his personal information spread across social media. Faced with thousands of people accusing him of murder, he was forced to make his accounts private. Berlin police took the unusual step of publicly responding, posting an image of Bachmann's claims, stamped with the word fake, and warning people not to spread misinformation or participate in online harassment. Investigators also began examining potential offences, including slander and false accusation. The reality turned out to be very different from the rumours. The suspect was a German-born 15-year-old student from Kira's own school. Because he was a minor, he was identified only by a legal pseudonym. According to Kira's mother, her daughter had admired him and even kept photographs of him in her room. Although they were never in a relationship, she described Kira as seeing him almost like a brother. During questioning, the teenager initially claimed that Kira had wanted her time on this earth to end and had asked him to help her. Investigators rejected that explanation. Family members, friends, and prosecutors pointed to her future plans, her sporting commitments, and the evidence recovered during the investigation. Detectives also discovered indications that the attack had been planned well in advance. According to prosecutors, the suspect had spoken to classmates beforehand about wanting to carry out an attack. On the day of the attack, he allegedly arrived carrying not only the weapon but also gloves, a mask, spare clothing, and other items suggesting preparation rather than impulse. After leaving the apartment, investigators said he discarded Kira's phone in an effort to conceal their messages before returning home and resuming normal activities. Minutes after the attack, he reportedly telephoned one of his friends to say he had carried out what he had previously discussed. The trial took place later that year, behind closed doors because of the defendant's age. Prosecutors argued that the crime had been carefully planned and motivated purely by a desire to find out whether he could commit a murder. The court rejected his claim that Kira had wanted for this to happen, describing that account as entirely fabricated. He was convicted of murder in November 2018 and sentenced to 9 years in youth detention, a verdict that was later upheld on appeal. For many people, however, the case became about far more than the criminal trial. It demonstrated how quickly misinformation can overtake facts, especially during the first hours of a major investigation. Before detectives had even established who was responsible, millions of people had already been presented with a completely different version of events. An innocent teenager had been falsely identified, conspiracy theories had traveled further than verified information, and a family's tragedy had become the center of an online political campaign long before the truth was known. Thank you so much for watching. I'm uploading daily true crime and dark content here on this channel, so make sure that you're subscribed, hit like on the video, and also drop a comment so you get shown more of my stuff. Please do be careful out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.